Libya and Egypt. He served more than 32 years studying MENA region. It's quite challenging.
34 now.
34 now? Yeah. My age. And also, we have Asma Khalifa. Asma is a Libyan activist and a researcher who has worked on human rights and women's rights and youth empowerment in Libya since 2011. Asma, she was awarded she received the 2016 Luxembourg Peace Prize during the World Peace Forum in the European Parliament. And in 2017, Asma was named one of the 100 most influential young Africans. I have known Asma for years. She has done remarkable work when it comes to youth empowerment and peace and reconciliation in Libya. Now, we are planning to hold you for an hour and a half. We will start with the panel for 20 to 25 minutes for statements, and then we will receive Q&A. Feel free to grab lunch meanwhile. Thank you. Let's start with William here.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here once again with Libyan American Alliance and with the other sponsors, National Interest Foundation and other supporters. There are people in the room who were at some of the events that I was going to talk about. We have politicians, we have analysts, we have officials, US and otherwise here, who had also special perspectives into what we'll be talking about today. My, I guess, added value is I've been studying the region for over 3 decades and teach it. I served in Embassy Tripoli for the US government and traveled regularly to Libya between 2003 and 2013. And I was not in Skhirat, I wasn't in Paris, I wasn't in Palermo, but I had the opportunity through some of the same networks that people in the room benefit from to follow in real time what was happening in Skhirat before, during, and after, in Paris before, during, and after, and in Palermo before, during, and after. Experiences from which we can glean some information, gather some lessons about what might be possible in Berlin. But let me start with my last trip to Berlin. I was privileged to go to Berlin, I believe it was February, with Middle East Institute to speak about Libya, Tunisia, and North Africa as part of a Middle East Institute Adenauer Foundation multi-day event on the region. And the most shocking thing that happened was that at the hosted dinner, which is usually a very pro forma event with toasts and happy talk, the American delegation, which included members from quite left perspectives all the way over to very pro-Trump and everything in between, was lambasted by our German host for expecting the Germans to be Europe, for expecting the Germans to be NATO, for expecting to sort of shepherd a disintegration of Europe and then ask Europe to be Europe. And I think that's particularly instructive when it comes to German frustration with the United States, German frustration with the EU and NATO state of affairs right now, and with its own domestic issues. And then when it looks at Libya and European dysfunction over Libya, the Germans are very frustrated at all levels of infighting and fragmentation that lead us to the current impasse, which makes, once again, the Germans reluctantly stepping in the thing that we're here to discuss today. Sure, do you want to say something?
Yeah. I'm sorry I missed to mention this earlier. So since April 4th, warlord, American citizen, General Khalifa Haftar launched his brutal offensive in Tripoli, aiming to capture its political and financial institution. General Khalifa Haftar and his allies, basically Emirates, Egypt, Russia, and France, they deliberately and systematically targeted so many civilian institutions, including airports, hospitals, and migration detention centers, causing death of thousands and more than nearly 200,000 IDPs in Tripoli. Just to keep you up to date with what's basically happening in Libya at the moment. Sorry, continue.
So we have a Europe that's always been a collection of nations that act both nationally and regionally when it's in their interest. And I think it would be incorrect to say that Europe is totally moving away from the EU project or away from NATO and only acting in national ways. But it's highly significant that each European country, when it comes to Libya and in general policies, are having a level of participation in the group project and then cutting side deals. The most interesting side deal in the recent news was Malta's secret side deal with Libyan sea authorities about migration to keep migrants away from Malta. I found it very interesting that the Italians are calling for Tunisians and Algerians to participate in the Berlin conference, not as part of a German position, but as a part of an Italian position, because the Italians believe the Tunisians and Algerians can bolster their case more in favor of the West. And so what that is an example of is sort of acting in regional ways that benefit the national interests, but retrenching towards national priorities. Now, when we look at the advanced discussions about Berlin, it's really interesting to see how slanted the press has gotten lately in terms of increasingly pro-West or pro-East coverage in almost everything you click on online. When you see press coverage, just to decode a little bit for you, talking about ceasefires, that's generally pro-West coverage. When you talk about press coverage talking about the goal of Berlin being disarming militias, that's generally pro-East coverage. And it's unfortunate, the increasing partisan coverage as we go forward. Now, what are the goals for Berlin? Number one, we're talking about ceasefires. Either a big ceasefire or mini ceasefires. I am not a partisan of regional ceasefires as have long been advocated for Syria, but end up entrenching and worsening problems rather than actually solving problems. But it is true that Libya has a long history since 2011 and before of micro conflicts being solved by local negotiations, and these should be encouraged. Again, not probably as a goal of Berlin, but if that can be a side benefit of groups meeting in Berlin, that's okay. What really needs to happen, though, is a big ceasefire. Will that happen as a result of the Berlin conference? Probably not. Why? Because of which Libyans are coming with which purpose. Right now, there isn't even agreement over which Libyans will attend, and it's supposed to be a European conference with the goal of Libyan ceasefires. Not going to happen. Second of all, there's a lot of discussion about respecting the arms embargo. Will we get full international respect of the arms embargo coming out of the Berlin conference? No. Why? Because those that have cast their lot with one side or another, who see themselves in sort of an existential conflict now, are not going to back down from the current march flows. Whether it's Turkey to the west, UAE to the east, and others that are helping. As mentioned in the recent UN experts report, the serial violators of the Libyan arms embargo are Jordan, UAE, and Turkey. And we also have new involvement from Sudan and Chad, which is particularly troubling. At the pre-Berlin summit at the UN in September, led by the French and Italian foreign ministers, they reiterated the oft-repeated refrain that there's no military solution for Libya, and then agreed on very little for the Berlin conference. Let me deal with this mantra for a moment, because it's one of the many things I hear about Libya that bother me. Those that say there is no military solution, that's wrong. There's a military solution for Libya, just like there is a military solution for Syria and there is a military solution for Yemen. It's just a devastating one at very high human cost and unsustainable. So you can kill tens of thousands of people the way Haftar did in Benghazi to get the so-called peace of Benghazi. There is a military solution. It's just a highly undesirable military solution because of the human cost.
Won't like that at all.
Yeah, but you know, we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking. Another thing I hated from my time in government, people always say things can't get worse. Things can always get worse. The conflict in Libya, which to the present has generally avoided casualties, could get much more lethal. We've gotten a glimpse of that in the recent bombing campaigns, the aerial bombing campaigns, as Haftar moved from a land approach to an air approach. It's bad now. It could get much, much worse. Our goal is to stop that. So if we have let's call it a negative, if not a positive goal for Berlin, it's simply to stop the bleeding. It's simply to start a conversation again about the parameters of future deals, about which Libyans could be included, about reducing arms flows, about reducing civilian casualties, about respecting international law, and about reducing the roles of foreign players. Now, the old paradigm of Europe used to be France versus Germany. France and its allies dealt with the Southern Med, and Germany and its allies dealt with Eastern Europe following the 89 to 91 transition in Europe. That division of labor, those sphere of influences, have been going away for a while now, and the Berlin Conference, in a way, is kind of a death knell to that evolution away from that division of labor. In the old days, Germany always deferred to France when it came to the Mediterranean. In the old days, France always deferred to Germany when it came to Eastern Europe. That's no longer the case because of the French failure here. Why did that happen? There's a number of reasons. I could give a 20-minute answer, I won't. But I think one of the main ones is that France got Tunisia wrong in the Arab Spring and then overcompensated in Libya. And the way in which France kind of did badly on Tunisia and then tried to overcompensate because of its interests in independent interests in Libya kind of disqualified it from whatever role it already had as an honest broker when it came to Libya, and has created this vacuum that Germany, to a degree, is stepping into right now. Now, there's another aspect here worth taking a quick look at, which is that the only of the 27 members of the European Union, the big three, the ones with really an international power, used to be England, France, and Germany. England is pretty much out of the picture now, despite recent meetings in Tripoli and their effort to play along. Because of Brexit and other things, they are more and more of a non-player in Libya. France is suffering from what I just said. Germany is, as I said in my opening anecdote, reluctantly kind of the last man standing when it comes to a European foreign policy, a European position on Libya. And because of that, it is stepping in on Libya and will try to increase its position. Now, just a couple of quick lessons from the previous meetings. Srerat was too internationally focused and not Libyan focused enough. It was insufficiently negotiated. As I was looking back at Bernardino's statements as they came out of Srerat, he's saying, it's great, the diplomats are happy, the people who signed are happy, now we just need to go talk to the armed forces. Well, you shouldn't have said there was a deal. There was a deal in place if you didn't have the armed forces on board in Srerat. It was missing a lot of representation, and it was too centered around Bernardino himself, which has been a serial problem in the various Libyan negotiations because we've often had too much focus on the mission, the UN mission, and not on the Libyan participants. I think in addition to some of the same weaknesses, Paris suffered from the photo problem, from the we need a deliverable problem, which Srerat also had, and we had the announcement of premature elections, which weren't going to solve everything, supposedly to shake things up, and all it did was create another failure. Palermo, a very similar thing. Most of the infighting before and during Palermo was about who was going to be in the photo op. And then the deliverable, a national conference, was ill-conceived and not going to solve the problem at hand. Because the problem has been the same since July 2015. It's that we didn't have a status for Haftar. We didn't have an agreement on how the two parliaments would operate. The fundamentals, which were not solved since Sirat, need to be solved in order to move forward. Now, there's a lot of discussion pre-Berlin about the Constitution and the constitutional basis for elections. The Constitution is quite flawed and didn't deal with key issues like oil revenues and other things. But more importantly, we don't need a constitution to move forward in Libya. And we certainly aren't going to solve all of the identity issues and the regional issues in advance of moving forward in Libya. What we need is a deal. We need a deal between the big power players, which will be the basis of a constitutional declaration, which is how we got to elections in Tunisia and how we got to the transitions going on in Sudan and other transitions that are going on.
Can we hold there?
Sure.
Speaking of the deal,
Is Asma here?
Asma should be here. Is Asma here? All right. Let's speak to Asma. Asma, she's a Libyan activist, and she would like to share more of a Libyan perspective on Berlin as well, and sense of ownership, and maybe a little bit of control. Hey, Asma, we see you.
I think there is a delay.
Hello? Yeah.
The audio.
Okay, good. Hi. I can hear them. Yes. Yes. Yes.
All right, Asma, well, thank you for being here with us today, and I would like to ask you, I'll just jump to the question. I mean, we had Palermo in November 2018 and Paris in Palermo in November 2018, and Paris before that was in May 2018, and we heard of Abu Dhabi as well. Now there's upcoming Berlin thing. From your perspective as a Libyan citizen, a Libyan activist, what's your perspective on this upcoming conference? Okay. She's delaying.
Well, I think as there is a lot with Libya, the diagnosis is that it's in 2014 was two actors who brought together to broker a deal or an agreement, and then they discovered later that the actors do not control all the other actors on the ground. So the mapping of Libyan actors involved in active conflict is wrong, not just only of the list. Also, they treat the Libyan conflict the civil war is separation of each other. So 2014 was handled as if it, so they've handled the political crisis as if that it's just it happened in 2014 and in consequence to 2011. And all of the conflicts that happened in between and the power vacuum that was being created.
All right.
So the concern here for me is that this conference will also only begin from the April 4th attack of conflicts, which are the root causes that has led to that conversion West region.
Asma, we had a conversation earlier that you weren't upset that the Libyan weren't
Second
invited yet.
concern is the crisis.
Do you hear me?
Sorry, the delay is bad.
Yeah, I'm sorry going through that. We had a conversation earlier, and you mentioned that the sense of ownership, it's missing in Berlin. There's no transparency in Libya, they're not invited. What's your perspective on that?
It's been left out for many years now that whenever there is an issue or a crisis in Libya, on Libyans, and not with Libyans. And so the problem is a lot on transparency as well. Who gets to be invited? What's the framework for this, for these talks?
We hear you.
And if the Libyans don't own a vision or a solution for the country, how can Germany or anyone else suggest anything that's realistic?
Right.
So Libya, these talks as things that happen somewhere else. That are handled by actors somewhere else. And they're not part of the discussion. Which means they can sign any agreement they want, but if armed groups and actors don't see it as realistic, then we are back to post-Sahara 2014.
Clear enough. Thank you, Asma. Thank you so much for your remarks. Yeah, obviously there's a delay.
Thanks for having me.
Stay on.
Stay on, Asma. Stay on.
Let me pick up where she left off, and let me first say that that's a perfect metaphor for Berlin right there, because we have Libya trying to participate. They're not fully participating while the Europeans fight over who's in charge of the dialogue. Let me just say a couple more things that I think are in close agreement with what Esma was saying. And hopefully she can hear us as well. First,
Phil, before can you speak into the?
oh yeah, I turned the microphone off. Can you hear me now? All right, so first of all, unlike Skhirat, unlike Paris, unlike Palermo, unlike even the Damis was supposed to be, or the Abu Dhabi negotiations, we need a deal between the major military actors. Now, whether you're talking to their political representatives or not, that's fine. Whether you're talking to the HOR instead of Haftar, that's fine. But it can't be a political dialogue absent a military dialogue, which is what many of the previous negotiations have centered on. Second of all, as I mentioned earlier, we don't need a constitution in order to move forward. We need a constitutional declaration that the two sides agree on coming out of the grand deal that I'm talking about, upon the basis upon which you can hold elections. Third, we need elections as soon as possible because both houses now have lost their mandate and have been continued by fiat by each side and continue to legitimize the war and funding flows absent participation by voting of the living population. Now, can you hold elections in this climate? Yes, municipalities hold them all the time. Most of Libya is not fighting most of the time. And like elections in other war zones, you might have to exempt certain areas at certain times, but you can hold elections in most of Libya most of the time. What you can't do is deal with the big, huge constitutional hornet's nest. And those that are advocating a quick constitutional solution are those that benefit from the Constitution's current draft, who don't want to deal with the outstanding issues that haven't been dealt with. So be wary of that. Those that want a national conference to solve everything don't understand that groups of 300 or 400 people can't make deals. That's not how it works. The big National Reconciliation Conference is for national reconciliation. And there are big things that have to come out of and be voted by big national conferences. But as we saw in Tunisia, as we saw in many other contexts, it's not the big group that makes the deal, it's the small group. Now, prior to Palermo and prior to Ghadames, which never happened, the main conversation among the Libyans that I spoke to and watching interact with each other was about who's going. And if that person's going, I'm not going. Libyans need to be encouraged to get past this mentality. That, and to give you a more extreme version of this, at an event Jason spoke at a couple of years ago, an MEI event, I watched two Libyans in the lunch line joking and exchanging information about their families, and then shouting at each other in the public event. And I even stood up during the public event and I said, why is it you guys were getting along so well out at lunch, and everything is fun, but you're putting on this performance for us about how you hate each other? Again, this performance of unwillingness to compromise because of what the other guy did to you, and yet private willingness to talk to everyone is something the Libyans are going to need help getting over and going to need encouragement to get over. Libyans privately will talk. They'll talk to anyone. And so those private dialogue spaces, public dialogue spaces sponsored by the UN with the cameras on, Berlin. No, we need private discussions among Libyans to work out the deals that we're talking about. A lot of people don't know, again, the Tunisia deal, the ultimate deal was worked out at the Hotel Bristol in Paris in August of 2013 between Ghannouchi and Essebsi. And they worked out the parameters of everything right through to the Economic Reconciliation Bill of 2016. It's these private deals, these private conversations that aren't performative, that are constructive, that need to be encouraged. Libyan ways of deal making. Berlin, Palermo, Ghadames, Abu Dhabi, Cairo, you name it, Malta, wherever we're going next, Dayton, Ohio, I would hope, need to be venues whereby Libyans are sequestered off on their own and given lots of room to talk things out with the support of the international community to support whatever deal they come up with, but not in a position as we saw in the events of Ghadames, where the UN was actually going to choose who was going and who was not going. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. So in that sense, I entirely agree with the broad outlines of what Esma was saying about not a necessarily Libyan organized and fully Libyan supported, but a Libyan driven negotiation in which the Libyans make the deals, decide accommodations they're willing to make for each other. Thank you.
I tell you something just to comment on that. I tell you why Libyans usually, we're very lost in the ideological noise and all this ideological rhetoric, and rather we're not really focusing on practical discussions. That's why you see people do not, talking constructively in events, but on the sides they're pretty much friends.
They're getting along, yeah.
Correct. Dario is here. Thank you so much, Dario, for being here with us.
Let me apologize first, but I got caught in a meeting because there was some traffic, plus I'm Italian.
What?
I'm justified by the fault.
And I'm a Libyan.
Why?
And while he's catching his breath, I remember sitting in Tunis with a bunch of Libyan officials prior to Palermo, and they kept saying, why haven't the Italians figured this out yet? And we're just a few days from Palermo, and I said, I'm from Boston. And in Boston, when an Italian guy invites you over to his house, you're either about to have the best meal you've ever had in your life, or he's gonna take you out to a restaurant. You get dressed up again. So we're hoping this time,
Dario Cristiani is a fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, based in DC, working on Italian foreign policy, the Mediterranean policy, and global politics. Dario has an extensive experience in the MENA region. Also, he used to live in Tunisia, and the first time I met him, he approached me with a Tunisian accent. I was like, wow, are you Tunisian? Floor is yours.
I think it's okay. Thank you. Yes, indeed. Working primarily on Italian foreign policy here in DC, but my broader experience is primarily on North Africa and the Middle East. Just let me say clearly that here I'm talking on my opinions here are personal and do not represent the opinions of the German Marshall Fund. So, like looking at the conference in Berlin, and actually the role of on the one hand Germany and on the other of European actors, as like I've always thought that for a number of reasons, like the two, let's say the two European actors that were playing the most significant role in Libya over the past years, Italy and France, for a number of reasons, their historical baggage, let's say, with Libya. The case of Italy is very clear and evident. In the case of France, like I think it's a bit underestimated and a bit overlooked. Like I keep stressing when talking about what has been happening in Libya since 2011, that the French, let's say, role in pushing for Gaddafi to leave, etc., is not something that we can easily understand just looking at the present. But I keep stressing that this is like a sort of geopolitical movement that France had in the region since at least the late 19th century. If we look at how, for instance, Italy, before its colonial attempt, tried to help the tribes in eastern Libya in order to face the French pushing from the south. So for these reasons, like I always thought that both countries, like their capacities of playing the role of a broker, let's say, was a bit undermined by this. You can see that clearly in the narrative of some like pro-Haftar medias, when the Italians started like the military hospital in Misrata. They were saying, they were basically accusing like groups from Misrata of allowing the former colonizers like to put their foot back on the Libyan soil. And at the same time, I think that especially over the past 3 years, the role of France was a bit too, let's say, focused on one side of the Libyan picture rather than of trying to bring the two sides to the table with no bias or prejudice. So from this point of view, I think that the German initiative, on one hand, because of the fact that Germany doesn't really have this sort of historical like baggage with Libya, but also because, and this is, I think that at the moment,
World War II.
well, I mean, okay, but that's I would say like a bit broader, like than just like, well, as a Europeans, we all have like historical baggages, and like we are guilty of a number of problems that we witness in the broader region up to now. So from if it was like that, then we shouldn't really have like relations of any sort. But because geography, we cannot really ignore that at some point. Like European countries must like try to help, like not looking only at their own actually interest. In the case of Germany, as I was saying, this historical baggage, like vis-a-vis Libya, is a bit less significant, if I can put it this way. And then, like, I also think that at the moment in Europe, in terms of understand how, like, analysts and governments understand the region, I think that Germany has something more than others do not have, because some of the best works I have read recently, depending of okay, of course, like there are different like dynamics at play, social, tribal, etc. But I also think that especially from 2014, the issue is not anymore just Est versus East or tribal groups that be the backbone of the previous regime against others. But there are a number of new cleavages that emerged. I keep stressing, and this is something that here in DC, I know that like people look at me like an idiot sometimes. That we should look at what happened with the political isolation law to understand the process that started with that. Then, of course, like the members of the previous regime that had like the political responsibilities over 42 years should be banned, but then like from that point of view, I thought that there were some sort of excessive like behavior on both sides in terms of imposing this sort of ban on people from the previous regime. And then like with the beginning of the current conflict in 2014, and then the deepening after April this year, my impression is that those kind of cleavages that we used to discuss in the past, they of course they are still there, because we are talking about like dynamics that have been playing in Libya for centuries. But at the same time, there are like a number of new elements. We can see that from the perspective of the current conflict, but also how the current conflict has helped strengthening a number of new alliances that until last year were impossible to think. Just look at like, if you want to put together all the different actors representing the plethora of groups were like present around Tripoli and Misrata, actually, from that point of view, the military operation launched by Haftar in April was the element that brought these groups together, because still until the clashes in Tripoli in August 2018, we could see that like many of these groups they were at odds with each other. And on this element, I brought that back. I used to cover Libya for another think tank here in this Jamestown Foundation, and in April, just like the day after the beginning of the conflict, I stressed the point that there is this element of that sometimes, like both in Europe and here in the US, we tend to underestimate, which is the psychology of marginalization, that we don't really understand how it is at play, which means that, especially after, I would say, 2013, there is this perception in every Libyan actor that if they are kicked out of the new emerging like environment, they could suffer the marginalization for other 40 years, which was basically like what many of these actors like to. So looking, let me look now towards how European actors from this point of view like have been interacting and are likely to interact. Like, I could see that the previous attempts, as I said before, Palermo, like Abu Dhabi, but also like Paris, there was always the significant presence of one actor that was in a way or another too close to one of the two continents. In the case of Palermo, like maybe, let's say that there could have been a chance to, how can I say, like to be less, more balanced. But at that time, as I said also in another occasion, there was like a significant problem with the Italian approach, which was that the entire debate before, during, and immediately after the Palermo conference was about whether Haftar was showing up for the picture with the leaders and not very much to discuss. And then there was like also a problem that at that time the attempt of Italy, because there was a reflection, especially with the new government, about like trying to reach out to Benghazi, to Tobruk, to Baida. But this was not done on one hand properly, and on the other hand consistently, because I no need to tell you that sometimes when like Italian foreign policy making, decision making, like approach is a bit like Byzantine, let's say, like it's a bit difficult to understand who is saying who is supporting whom, etc., etc. So, as I said before, in my very personal opinion, what Germany can offer as a broker is the fact that it doesn't really have all this this problem with history, and also it doesn't really have a problem with it did not focus too much on one specific actor on the ground. Because if there is one thing on which we have to be very clear on that, if like as external like actors trying to support Libya stabilization, and also that on this slide I cannot read. I think the idea that someone or some groups can be left completely out of the picture is like is a recipe for disaster. So from that point of view, like if, then we can discuss about like who started what, etc. But the process must be the most inclusive possible, and I think from this point of view of the big European countries that can step in this kind of context, Germany is the country that can actually deliver. Then, as I also said before, I think they have an understanding of what's going on at the moment, which is a bit more sophisticated than that of other countries. And at the same time, Germany has the capacity, so maybe like, I don't think like my Italian friends would like what I'm about to say, but also some friends in France, that Germany has a number of tools to push the Italians and the French to start like talking to each other on that. Nice. These tools are in Brussels, these tools are in Frankfurt, etc. So I think
Get a French-Italian deal in Berlin.
no, but at the same time, like we can start talking the same languages. Italians, we struggle with foreign languages in general, especially for a question of accent. But maybe someone from Turin or Val d'Aosta, they can actually have their voice heard in Paris. That's it. So I will stop here. Then we can keep talking during the Q&A. Thank you, and sorry again for being like
Thank you, Dario. Thank you, everyone. I mean, Germany has an active voice, and G20 has an active voice in the Security Council, and of course, pretty much a leadership role in the European Union. So we'll go ahead with a Q&A, and I see a question from Jason, and the first one there. So for him as well.
Great. Well, thank you for organizing this. I'm okay with that one. Thank you for organizing this session.
Jason thinks as well.
Thanks, Masada, and the Libyan American Alliance for organizing this session and bringing these important issues to the forefront. As always, Bill, I found your remarks challenging and provocative. I need to leave, unfortunately, very soon, but I disagree with two key points. You were making the argument that we need a deal, that somehow having a deal emerge either from be it Saqqara, Palermo, or Abu Dhabi, or Germany, and a deal among armed actors, that then, if it's among the armed actors, it can stick on the ground. I question and challenge that notion. I understand that many people say the problem with Iraq was the political leaders and not the armed leaders. And the armed leaders run the political leaders. But actually, it's the economic institutions and the semi-sovereign bodies which run the militia groups, and then the militia groups run the two political bodies. So if they go to Germany and they don't discuss devaluation of the dinar, or who gets to control the central bank, or how letters of credit fraud works, then you're just talking about symptoms, because the cause is the economic structures. The militias are a symptom, and then the third order symptom is the second stringers, to quote Nick Mason, who get elected to things like the HOR or the GNC, or who are chosen to be on the GNA. So I wanted to problematize that. And then there's an idea in the Libyan civil war, like in the Lebanese civil war, that, in the lunch line, an Islamist and a pro-Haftar guy are able to chat, but they need to make ideological positions when they're out in public. I believe that was to some extent true in the beginning of the period, 2011 to now, but now people have been hating on each other and killing each other, and my cousin is dead, and the Mablag Adam is owed from these to this. No, these are no longer just public BSing, unfortunately, because I read the Arabic Twitter and Facebook for my career. This is like a real hatred. And we now have a situation beyond what we had, where Libyans didn't hate other Libyans, and there was no legacy of civil war. There's not 1840 and 1860 like in Syria and Lebanon, genocidal civil wars of one group against another. Libya hasn't had that legacy, but now it does. Now it has the legacy of the war from 2014 to present, and therefore the good auspices of, for example, what's been called the economic dialogue, and that's what you can't get Kabir to sit down with Maitig and with Sanallah, with Sarraj and Ali al-Hibri, unless the American ambassador makes it happen. They won't meet with each other. They won't have coffee. They won't decide anything. So I, again, am asking you, Bill, yes, the idea that, Libyans are good, they chat with each other, there's not much hatred, just let them get on with it and they can chat. Well, why haven't they gotten on with it? There's been plenty of time to fly to Tunis or Paris or London and meet at the Dorchester. But if Sarraj is staying there, Kabir won't go have coffee with him unless he's forced to do so. So what can we do to get around that?
Since he has to leave, do you want me to address that?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
And we'll go to Isam after.
Hasna?
I mean, I'm building over it, so you can't see her.
Oh, I can't see her.
So.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bill,
So
she's
she's
back. All right, so, as usual, Jason, you have problematized my problematizations brilliantly. We used to talk about the three circles, the economic, the security, and the political, and ultimately you have to be operating on all three cylinders, if you're gonna get a deal on Libya. I don't ascribe to your and Weiner's tendency to sound like you're reducing the political to the economic, or in this case, the security, the economic. I really see it as a Venn diagram, as three columns, and so you have to,
Separately.
so you have to work out the economic aspects on their own terms and in intersection with the other two. You have to work out the politics on their own terms and in intersection with the two. You have to work out the security aspect on their own terms and in intersection with the two, which makes it really complicated three-dimensional chess, but that's what the big diplomats get the big bucks for. I do not believe that an economic deal creates a security deal. I don't believe that the militias, who are often willing to fight without being paid, that they depend on the money. In fact, the spoils war of Libya in many ways is a function of the fact that they weren't getting paid at times. And so the willingness to fight without economic undertaking, even though a lot of the fighting is over economics, as you rightly, consistently point out, means that you're going to have to deal with all of it all at the same time. In terms of third stringers, I kind of like that to a degree, that characterization that you quoted Nate on, but yeah, second stringers, third stringers for the three codes, yeah. And in keeping with what I just said, they are nonetheless operating on their own terms. And I saw them in 18 at the meetings I attended in Tunis, notwithstanding all of the hatred and bloody rhetoric and realities that you properly point out, still willing to talk to each other. Now, how does civil wars end? We've had working studies, some of us have been to those events and around town. Often it's a foreign intervention, that's actually the most common. But sometimes the two sides just get sick of killing each other and tired of the violence. We're not there yet in Libya. You can imagine a scenario where we got to that. The other scenarios are much harder. It's less frequent in terms of the ending of civil wars to simply negotiate the way out, the way we're trying to on Libya. Let me point out that while you're right that Haftar sealed the deal on the Tripoli, which is getting along, the original deal was signed by an UNSMIL negotiation to defend Tripoli, and then Haftar sealed the deal. But that was UNSMIL actually doing its job, which gets me to your final point, which is absolutely true, and that's, if I wasn't clear on that, let me agree with you wholeheartedly and underline it. The Libyans are not going to do this on their own. So all the pieces I saw another one this morning about how Libyans have to be left or have to do it on their own is simply wrong. You need a little bit of arm twisting. You need some definite international involvement to get everyone at the table inclusively, as many Libyan representatives as possible, as many international representatives as possible, and it will have to be facilitated by the international community, even if the ultimate deal making is Libyan. I hope I addressed all of you.
Assuming that the Libyans did not work in favor of the countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Asma, would you want to say something on this? You raise your hand?
Hang on a minute. Could you hear us? She does have a delay.
She's speaking already, not
Yeah, I'm just putting away the headset so that I don't hear myself. I think that the Libyan conflict is not longer just Libyans. There are also actors, international and regional, who are very much involved. So I agree with the mediation section, and I think it also should happen on an international regional level on Libya, because the issue is there's so many overlapping and conflicted interests in the country, already so much lack of accountability, not with the opposite, but also I think I've witnessed that in Shiraz, sometimes some actors would be glad to, not glad, they would agree on certain things, but then there are regional actors who enable them to take different choices. They want them to have a strong rule, or that they feel that there are moving franchise if they agree with budget. So a need of balance needs to be done, and I agree that Germany could do something better, hopefully. Also because it has been careful since 2000 not to launch the offensive. It did join later, but they have also consistently since 2000 been funding projects for political security and for support of Jewish and support civil society. So they would have perhaps a different way, hopefully, of dealing with it. And one last point. The international community has always, not just in Libya, has always put stability over rights, democratization, actual countries, and that needs to change. Otherwise, because if there is no stability as status quo, you will try for crimes against all crimes and crimes against humanity in Libya. Thanks.
If you didn't hear everything she said, I think the last point was key. I'm just going to repeat what she said. And this is true. The international community almost always privileges stability over democracy, human rights, war crimes, and all that. And she said you won't get stability unless you deal with those other issues as well.
Can I add one point on the economy? Actually, here it's not written, but I'm a fellow with the German Marshall Fund and the Instituto Affari Internazionali wrote. And actually, Jason wrote a very interesting paper for YAI last month on the economic roots of the Libyan war. I think on this, it's essential. If we look at how certain, like especially like some of the motivations pushing after, and some groups in the East is about the control of the central bank. And then you can see that over the past 5 years, like especially now, maybe it's a bit less significant, but there was a point in which foreign exchange frauds, etc., were actually out of control. And this was like very much connected with the role of the militias controlling the port in Tripoli, etc., etc. But on this, I think there is like within the militias, especially in Tripoli, I would say that there is like two levels. There is the leadership, which is very much into these things, and they tend to be like a bit more pragmatic, if I may say. Where they see business opportunities, they might push to have a deal. The groups instead of like fighters based in the neighborhood, etc., they tend to be a bit, and on this, like they fight without being paid in some cases, and they are also those that, like according to some stories I heard when I was in Tunis, that at some point there were chats between different groups about shifting. These did not happen because it was like the groups on the ground, the revolutionaries of the neighborhood, that prevented some of their leaders from achieving like a deal. And this is something that on the English media did not really appear a lot, but there was a stream of like like murders between like second lines members of militias in Tripoli that like no one was actually, to the extent that even the UN like decided to make like a public announcement on that, and no one really understood at that time what was going on. Like we don't really know the cause, so like it might even be like that they had personal issues. But I would suggest that some of these dynamics might be at play in this kind of things.
And accusations of, sometimes
Yeah.
people are killed or accused of being treasonous when in fact.
All right, so we have Issam, so Ibrahim, Amal, and Khalid. All right.
Issam Amesh, the president of the Libyan American Alliance. Thank you, National Interest Foundation, for hosting this wonderful program and an excellent exchange from the panelists. I just wanted to raise a point to the fact that I think for us to expect the Berlin meetings to solve the Libyan problem is a way an overshoot. I think the fact is we need to identify the fact that the outside interference in Libya and the lack of an international consensus on the general parameters of what would allow a process in Libya that will lead to solving a lot of these issues that we are lining is the main premise behind Berlin. And I think if we overload Berlin, like the Libyan side wanting to be represented or some of the actors who want to come to the table, not that it's not important, but I think if we're realistic about achieving something out of Berlin, then we need to basically put a mechanism by which we can stop the war and the fighting. We can put a mechanism by which we ensure that there's no continued military assistance and violations of the arms embargo on all parties, no question, and enforcing measures that arguably can de-escalate the conflict. People were discussing things about the air blockade and so on and so forth. That's deliverable and that's doable within what Berlin is capable of delivering. The second thing that Berlin can deliver, I think, is because of the ongoing disarray that's happening even in the international community. Countries that are interfering in ways that are very, very conflicting, violating UN resolutions, shifting even internal dynamics in some countries. The government is so and so in Italy, then Italy's role is this, and otherwise it's different, and so on and so forth. Needing to bring international will in order, because it is very important. There's no question about the fact that without their support, the Libyan conflict will not, get a resolution. But it needs to be worked out amongst them in seeing a future in which the UAE can sit with Turkey and agree on what's a minimum that's acceptable, or Egypt, and so on and so forth. And without the stick of the international community, and I mean a real stick, not just, trying to convince somebody while they're killing and violating and doing all this stuff, nobody will really step back. And the lack of, until recent, the lack of US interest, let's say, or, so on and so forth, have given us no stick to possibly influence countries that then would only listen to the US and so forth. So that is, if we can just get those two deliverables, stopping the war and ensuring tools by which, and I tell you, I had meetings with President Erdogan and his foreign minister and his, political consultant directly, where he said that's exactly what we want to deliver out of Berlin. And this is very recently, before the UN, when they met, and then constantly met again in the So there's clear understanding of some of the very important factors that if they're put, I think it would help. The only last thing I would add is the Libyans need to start taking initiative in seeing that if those conditions are fulfilled, what is the version of the Libyan attempt at this solution? Whether it's going back to Damas, or whether it's offering, a different solution between the, modifying the presidential council and so on, elections being one, what do we do with the constitution? I like very much what Bill said about, the Tunisian model of addressing the constitution issue in Libya instead of insisting on referendums and bringing a constitution and so on and so forth. So there is ways to work this out. And I want to mention and commend Mr. Khalid al-Mishri, the president of the High Council. He's the only Libyan politician today who really just bypassed all this nonsense and offered an actual initiative. Plus, minus, good and bad, it still needs to be modified, yes, but it's a Libyan-driven attempt to be ready to offer a solution, working with the UN beyond the conflict. But without doing that, we can't really move forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Sam. We have a question from Mr. Ibrahim, and then Khalid.
We'll take that as a question, as an answer, not a question.
I'm glad that someone agreed with me that Iraq was centered around Mr. Lyon. Because one time I mentioned that fact and somebody said that's not true, but that is the most important thing. We have Iran agreement, and I think the Iran agreement has been put not to be implemented. It would be difficult to implement the Iran agreement. I am member of the High State Council of Libya. I represent the city of Benghazi. And I dealt with Iran because I am the chairman of the committee on implementing Iran. And believe me, it has been drafted to be impossible to implement. I'd like to say something here. We were almost getting our luggage toward the dams. And many Libyans agreed to participate, including the High State Council. Even we have a lot of difficulties with Mr. Salama in clarifying many items. But we said, okay, we'll go. And many others said, we'll go. I don't know what is going to be the result, but there was this understanding that we have to go. But Mr. Haftar has another idea. Now, Haftar was present in Paris, was present in Palermo, was present in Abu Dhabi. He would be present in the dams. Maybe not himself, but his followers. He did not want to reach an agreement. He do not want to be a party in any agreement. He wants to be the agreement that Haftar, and it's going to be the same problem. The international community is still now saying that we have to let everybody, including Haftar. There is nothing called including Haftar. There is excluding everybody but Haftar. That's Haftar's way. Unless we understand this, then we are going to go around. Now, Mr. Ghanouchi and Sipsi got together in a hotel and reached an agreement. My friend, they don't have Hefter. If they have Hefter, they will not be able to reach an agreement. And that's what happened with us. We're almost every time very close to an agreement between the House of Representatives and the High State Council. And then we found that Hefter jumped and did not allow the House of Representatives to agree upon this agreement. Now, the objectives of Berlin ceasefire, and they are talking about unconditional ceasefire. And of course, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, France, they are in agreement with this, and they push for that, because that means that Haftar will keep the positions now around the capital. Now, what I'm talking about? I'm talking about if, say, Arlington, forces in Arlington threatening Washington. So he's very close around the capital. So that's not going to work, because only giving him that chance to infiltrate and get to the middle of the capital. The second object is to enforce the arms embargo. And the United Nations always will do that without success, but they will do that anyway on the high seas. That means that no weapons will reach to the government of Tripoli. The legitimate government of Tripoli will not get any arms. But Haftar is going to get that through the Egyptian borders. That was going on 5 years, and nobody stopped that. The third object of the Berlin is that after they get this agreement, which is not going to happen, they want to convene another conference, Libyan Europe. Believe me, if no solution for the presence of the forces of Hitler around Tripoli, no solutions of stopping his supporters, United Arab Emirates, France, Egypt, and now Russia with their mercenaries there in Tripoli, if there is, that has not happened, then there will not be a meeting for the Libyans. There will be a meeting for some people who Mr. Salama will select, as Mr. Leon has done before in Khairat. And that is not going to work. Now, I just want to finish by saying, I cannot understand that the international community, the United States, they ignore the fact that some of the parties who are going to attend Berlin and who have a say in the Libyan matter, they have bases, military bases on the Libyan soil. United Arab Emirates maintain Air Force Base, Al Khadim, they call it Al Khadim, south of Al Marj, is 120 kilometers from Benghazi. It has been used to bomb Benghazi, Derna, and it's used now to receive mercenaries from Sudan and send them to fight in Tripoli or in Jafra. And it has been used to get supplies and arms and send them to Haftar. So that's one. The other one in Jafra Air Force Base has been used as a runway for Russians, for French, for United Arabs. Now we are ignoring all of that. Ignoring that the Egyptian is supplying Haftar with all kinds of arms through the Egyptian Libyan borders. And there is nobody talking about that. So what we are going to expect from Berlin conference? I am sorry to say we put many eggs in Paris, it didn't work. Many eggs in Palermo, it did not work. Matter of fact, it was a laugh when Haftar come and he did not allow anything to happen in Palermo, nothing. And in Paris, he said he's in agreement. As soon as he reached the regiment, he changed his mind. And in Abu Dhabi, the same thing. Now we are going to be in this circle unless we realize that there will be no stability, no peace in Libya, as far as Mr. Haftar has his own way. Of course, a person who does not care about who's going to be killed, and does not care about what he lose in equipment and all of that, because he's receiving that free from United Arab Emirates, from some countries surrounding Russia, and so on. I'm sorry, I took long, but that is what I thought that I have to say. And thank you for your presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your remarks. Just to remind you, the Confederate Army almost made it to Arlington, but now we have one USA. It's the center. Emma.
Yeah, my name is Alhad David from Arab America Media, and I'm so happy that our contributing writer who lived in Libya, and he is here, John Mason, right there. Thank you for joining us, especially that you are expert on Libya, and our intern from Libya is Yassin Rashad. But my quick question is, maybe this for Asma, is there a genuine effort to involve Libyan women in the process of stabilizing Libya? Thank you.
Let's get a question from Khalid and we will come back to this.
Yes, hi. Yes. So it's working. Yeah, it's working now. Hi. My question is directly on one issue that I've been trying to answer or understand. With all what's going on in Libya and everyone interfering, and now Russia's playing this role, we understand it. But why America has been so absent from the scene? I mean, people deal here with the State Department and with U.S. officials, people working on Libya. What is the answer to this question? Why is America not paying enough attention, if any attention at all, to the issue in Libya? We all know Somalia 30, 40 years ago, the vacuum is the result. The result of that vacuum is a stateless or lawless land, and same happened in eastern northern Syria, where it was filled by ISIS. Why doesn't the United States pay enough attention to this problem, in your opinion, as a panelist?
Right. Any other questions? One more question from Munji and then.
Yeah, my question is very quick. I mean, it's why there's the absence of, I mean, somebody probably talked about this, the absence of Libyans at this conference, but also the absence of Tunisia and Algeria. I mean, if there is any other countries that are affected by what's going on in Libya, there's the immediate effect is felt in Tunis and Algeria before even Egypt.
Very solid. All right, Asma. So Emma asked you, what's the role of women in all this apparatus?
Peacemaking.
Peacemaking. Here we go.
Not just what's the role, but also how have they been involved?
Yes, how the women have been involved in the
I
peacemaking
believe
process.
there was a genuine effort, which it's unfortunately there isn't. Since Herat and UN has culturally appropriated that with response, actually, the United Nations, when we asked how we would identify women as part of the negotiation, although they were out of the government, the response was that it's service, like, and in substance, two Libyan women were added on the tape, but they were creation to the men. Important. the corridors, so you can implement a living civil society by women. And have really even pressing root causes for the issue of the issues of the conflict, civil society again, and then set in evidence on as part and it's about the who's to be invited. The way the Libyan conflict is being addressed, so we're now active in politics and until and more in much more violent consequences of the conflict, like the MPs thought to be also killed in the east of Libya because she was opposition of the invasion so quickly. We're still not seen as strong actors because we're not the ones holding guns. We're not the ones barreling around militias, and we're not the ones who are these countries. So in a way, a lot of the time, the way I see it. Troublemakers are the ones who get to sit on the table, decide to huge out the country, and people who work for stability, people who know the solutions to root causes, are not invited and are not important.
All right. So basically, Asma saying that we're not the ones who's holding guns, and I agree with that. Absolutely, 100%.
Should we conclude? Are we going to try to?
No, we have a couple questions from Murji as well. Why?
Oh, no, we got questions. You want us to answer them and conclude, or we ready to go to
Yes.
2:30 or 2, or what's our?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
yes.
so I'll take the first round, then you can. All right, so, I'm gonna mansplain, only because but I think some of the things she was referring to is that early on, women's groups were engaged in a number of ways. I didn't hear her mention the Mothers of the Martyrs, but that was one of several women's groups that played a very important role, not only in raising certain issues and being part of the process, but even in brokering local peace deals, and they were directly involved, particularly in the South and the West, in some of those micro deals. Women's groups have been also victimized by militias in the East and the West, and there's been prominent kidnappings, assassinations, and other women activists, to the point that most of the women activists that I know have to some degree gone underground amidst the current conflict. And so beyond that, I have to be on the ground to know what they're doing, within the protection of where they are, but they're not out and about the way they were, even in the 11 to 13 period when they were deeply involved in a lot of activities. And certainly it's worth mentioning that you need women at the table in national reconciliation, in constitution making, and all those issues. On Tunisia and Algeria, I'll just underscore what I said in my opening remarks, which is that the Italians wisely want to include the Tunisians and the Algerians. I wondered why they hadn't mentioned the Moroccans in the same breath. I wonder if the Moroccans are already included, but as I've said at many venues, including before at LAA events, the Moroccans, Tunisians, and Algerians have all been remarkably neutral and constructive, unlike every Arab country to the east of Libya. And we need to encourage full Moroccan, Algerian, and Tunisian participation in Berlin and events going forward. In terms of the U.S., did he step out?
No, he's here. Khalid, yes.
Yeah, Khalid. I'll answer his question so I can tell him what I said. But there are probably 10 or 15 reasons why the Americans have been disengaged on Libya, some of which are familiar to you and some which may be, but just to pick a couple off the list. There's a bandwidth issue of understaffing that we have in Tunisia and Libya. We just don't have enough people on the ground doing much. There are a bunch of Americans at UNSMIL that in some ways are extensions of the weak U.S. mission in Tunis. It was an American that worked with the militia deal. It was Americans that do a lot of political analysis. within UNSMIL and in UNSMIL Europe, but there's just not enough Americans involved. There's war fatigue in the United States across the political spectrum. There's deferring to Europe, which in the case of Libya, for the historical reasons, is kind of ridiculous. There's no obvious win. It's hard to get a White House interested if you can't present them with a half-baked deal and then say, come finish this deal with us, the way Trump just got involved in the Ethiopia-Egypt dispute, and that may even lead to a deal, you know. So you can get a White House involved if you show them something that they can graft onto and say, you know, you can run the football into the end zone here. And the way to get both Democrats and Republicans interested in Libya has always been counterterrorism and regional stability issues. With the Republicans, there's a subset interested in the oil issues more. And then for the liberal internationalists and the neocons, there's the democracy and human rights agenda, but those are shrinking constituencies in Washington as the anti-interventionists of right and left are sort of in the fore of U.S. policy debates. So Libya has to not be framed as an intervention. It has to be framed as peacemaking, with the U.S. in a peacemaking role. Let me just conclude by making one or two other points. I agree wholeheartedly with Darius on the role of the importance of understanding the political isolation law of 2013 on many levels, including that, notwithstanding that Haftar is driving most of the problems now, the lustration law of 13 was one of the pre-Haftar derailings of a political space, an inclusive political space in Libya to allow hundreds of thousands of ex-Gaddafi, and the lustration law in Tunisia was defeated by one vote, when Ghannouchi himself, who's not even a member of parliament, went down on the floor of parliament and talked to the people just into abstaining, and that allowed Nida Tunis to exist. You know, so it took a lot of political will in Tunisia to defeat the lustration law. It failed in Libya to defeat, and instead you had death threats on the parliamentarian chairs and guns, and it was guns in the parliament, and you know, and that was part of that Jacobinist or sans-culottist, you know, Libyan revolutionary fervor that put us in the position that we're in.
Over than 250 storming incidents.
Yeah. And so in your list,
That's not because of the isolation law.
the isolation law did not start the civil war,
Now,
but it was a contributing factor.
if we want to see,
Yeah.
most of these intervention to the Congress at that time was made by the rebels. We have the proof of that. It is not. It started since 2013 that the United Arab Emirates has its interest in Libya to distract all the work of the Congress. We have proved that.
Right, but in May of 2013, the UAE did not play a big role in the illustration law. No, that was pre-UAE involvement. Let me just add to your list, in agreement with what you said, and everything you said, a lot of what you said, that Sudan and Jordan were implicated in the UN report as well, and have to be taken to task. And let me conclude by saying that, and in response to something you said about the Germans are the least bad power broker on Libya right now. But they have tons of problems. And when you look at the German analysis and German coverage of Libya, it's that old Orientalist BS about tribes, the old Orientalist BS about Arab mindsets and Islam. And for every German, you have that sort of enlightened and really interesting new analysis. You have another German that's trotting out the same old BS that we get at British universities and the Italian universities. There's an Italian researcher came to Washington and said, they've been going down since the 1930s, you know, and you have the equivalent in Germany.
Like we always say, we are the first ones that put the names of all the tribes on the paper.
And so I wholeheartedly conclude by saying we can't depend on the Germans here. The Germans are going to need help of everyone in this room, of Americans. They can't pull it off on their own. And I'll turn it over to you.
Very super quickly on this, like I do agree, like 200% on the fact that they are the least bad, and that was my point. Like, of course, if we think that one actor alone can actually carry like the burden is no way. On the United States, like, my analysis on that is not as sophisticated as the one of William. It's basically, the problem, in my opinion, is geography. Like, the Libyans are 7,000 miles away, something like that. So it's a European problem, and this is something that it's been repeated. Then, like, I also think the impact of the facts that happened in the region in September 2012, not only like in Benghazi, but also like in Tunis, etc. Like, there is like a general problem with thinking why we should actually go there having problems when it's not something that it's actually it's not like an issue that is going to have an immediate impact on us. Then on Tunisia and Algeria, the problem there is that like they have enough on their plates. Like in Tunis now, like with the negotiations for the government is going to be a disaster. Then like some old Gaddafis might be. I know for sure that some of them in Tunis are a bit excited because they said that the new president, Kais Saied, is actually one of theirs because of some ideas that they say, oh, they come straight from the Green Book. I think on this, I would be very, very cautious because he's an interesting political character, but like I think especially in Europe, we tend to like misrepresent him. So that's why I think, and especially for Tunisia, like for Algeria and Morocco, like the security impact is significant. But for Tunisia, that's something that is even at play. If you go for a cafe in Lac you have to make sure that you avoid certain cafe because it's certain groups going there, etc., etc. So, and you can see that with the number of people coming to private hospitals in Lawina, for instance, that there is even there like some dynamic at play that can be directly influenced by the situation on the ground, like in Tunis, like in Libya. Sorry. Okay, I think we can stop here.
Thank you so much for everyone being here today. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Dario, for your remarks. Thank you so much for Bill for your remarks. Asma, thank you so much for your very profound remarks, and hopefully we'll keep in touch. You wanna?
Thank you.
All right. Please pick up our. There's a bill on Libya that we're working on right now, and we would like to hear from you, your feedback, maybe on email. Also, Anwar, she's a director of our civil society engagement division. If you have any questions, you can ask her as well, and great to know. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you.
The in-program is over there. Just at the end.
Yeah, I didn't see it announced.